and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together.
At first, it wasn't even the lack of sex that hurt the most. It was the way the lack of sex slowly turned into a kind of silence between us, like a door inside the relationship had been locked and nobody would admit it out loud. If he didn't want sex once in a while, that would have felt normal. People get tired, people get stressed, bodies have seasons. But this wasn't that. He refused to initiate at all, and when I tried, he routinely turned me down, not once, not twice, over and over. Enough times that it stopped feeling like a temporary phase and started feeling like this was simply the way our relationship was going to be. At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself not to take it personally. I thought maybe he was anxious. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe he was dealing with something he couldn't explain. Maybe he didn't feel good about himself. Maybe he was exhausted. I kept giving him the benefit of the doubt because that's what you do when you love someone. You don't want to become suspicious. You don't want to become bitter. You don't want to make someone feel pressured. You want to be supportive. You want to be patient. But patience has a limit when it's mixed with constant rejection. After a while, it didn't feel like I was being patient. It felt like I was being quietly erased. It felt like I was becoming the person who had to pretend I didn't have needs. Because having needs made me feel ashamed. It felt like I was walking around with this constant awareness that I was unwanted, and that awareness started to change the way I carried myself. It's hard to explain, but when you get turned down enough, you stop reaching. Not because you stop wanting closeness, but because your body starts protecting you from more humiliation. Your nervous system learns the pattern. Your heart learns the pattern. You start to brace for rejection before you even speak. And because I didn't want to accept that reality, my mind did what so many minds do in this situation. It went looking for reasons. It started building theories. It started searching for what I could do differently. Because when someone you love is shutting you out physically, it's hard not to wonder what's wrong with you. It's hard not to look at yourself and think, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I'm not exciting enough. Maybe I'm not sexy enough. Maybe he needs variety. Maybe he's bored. Maybe he's comparing me to someone else. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I started blaming myself without even meaning to. I'd catch my reflection, and suddenly I'd be judging myself harshly, as if my body was something that needed to be improved to earn love. I'd think about my clothes and wonder if I looked too normal. I'd think about how I spoke and wonder if I sounded unappealing. I'd think about the way I moved around the house and wonder if I seemed too tired or too stressed, as if I needed to look like a fantasy all the time to be worthy of desire. It's such a cruel mental place to live in, because it turns intimacy into a performance. It turns your relationship into something you constantly have to win. And the worst part is that you can do everything right and still feel the same emptiness, because the problem isn't you. The problem is what's happening between you. and whether the other person is willing to face it honestly. Still, I tried. I tried hard. I lost weight. Not because I suddenly decided I wanted to change for myself, but because I wanted to see if it would make him want me. I wore lingerie. Not because I wanted to turn myself into a prop, but because I wanted to feel desired. I offered things I thought might interest him, things that required vulnerability and trust. I put myself out there in ways that were not easy, because I wasn't just trying to have sex. I was trying to bring closeness back into the relationship. I was trying to feel like we were still connected. I was trying to stop feeling lonely right next to the person I was committed to, and still nothing. That was the part that broke me down in a quiet way. Because if it had been a simple mismatch of libido, maybe we could have talked. If it had been stress, maybe we could have planned rest and reconnection. If it had been depression, maybe we could have sought help together. If it had been a temporary slump, maybe we could have waited it out. But I wasn't getting any real explanation. I wasn't getting any real effort. I wasn't getting the kind of honest conversation that makes problems workable. I was getting a wall, and the wall didn't just affect sex. It affected the way I felt about myself. It affected the way I felt about the relationship. It affected the way safe I felt being vulnerable. Because when you keep reaching and you keep getting turned down, you start to feel stupid for trying. You start to feel like you're annoying. You start to feel like you're asking for too much. You start to feel like your desire is embarrassing. And that feeling can creep into everything. So eventually, I tried to do what adults are supposed to do. I tried to talk about it like a real issue, not a blame game, not a fight. I wanted a solution. I wanted a way forward. I wanted to stop living in this constant tension where I felt rejected and lonely and unwanted, while also feeling guilty for even wanting to address it. I brought up the idea of opening the relationship. I didn't do it casually. I didn't do it because I didn't care about him. I didn't do it because I wanted to run around and be reckless. I did it because I was trying to find a path that respected both of us. I was trying to acknowledge reality. Reality was that he didn't want sex. Reality was that I did. Reality was that I didn't want to resent him forever, and I didn't want to keep shrinking myself. I was trying to solve a problem instead of living in silence. I was trying to be honest instead of cheating behind his back, which I didn't want to do. I was trying to find something that could allow both of us to breathe. I knew open relationships aren't for everyone. I knew it might not be something he wanted. I would have understood a calm no. I would have understood I'm not comfortable with that. I would have understood I can't do that, but let's find another way. I would have understood I need time to think. Even rejection of the idea could have been handled with respect. But he didn't just reject it. He attacked me for bringing it up. He acted like I had done something unforgivable by even asking. He treated me like I was immoral. He treated me like I was disrespecting him, when the truth was, I was trying to be honest about being lonely. I was trying to be transparent. I was trying to talk about something that was already hurting the relationship. Instead of seeing my question as an attempt to fix the problem, he treated it like proof that I was the problem. That response hurt in a very specific way, because it didn't just shut down the solution. It shut down the conversation. It made it clear that he wasn't interested in meeting me halfway. He wasn't interested in understanding why I had even suggested it. He wasn't interested in holding my feelings with any compassion. He was interested in making me feel ashamed for having needs. There is a difference between a person who says no and a person who says, "How dare you ask?" One is a boundary, the other is contempt. And contempt is what kills relationships, Because contempt doesn't allow closeness. Contempt makes you feel small and dirty and wrong for being human. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he did something else that was so dismissive it almost felt unreal. He tried to logic my feelings away. He told me I would lose my sex drive by 40 because he looked it up. So I was worried about something I wouldn't even care about in 7 years. That kind of comment is cruel, because it treats your present pain like it's a silly overreaction. It treats your real loneliness like it's just a temporary mood. It treats your needs like something that can be dismissed with a random piece of information he found somewhere. It's him saying, your feelings don't matter because I've decided they'll disappear later. It's him using pseudo-facts to shut down a real human conversation, and it completely missed the point. Even if a person's libido changes with age, that doesn't erase what I was experiencing right then. I wasn't asking about sex at 40. I was asking about being desired now. I was asking about intimacy now. I was asking about connection now. I was asking about not feeling like I was begging for scraps in my own relationship. Because the real pain wasn't even just physical desire. It was rejection. It was the constant feeling of not being wanted. It was the loneliness of lying next to someone who wouldn't touch you, who wouldn't reach for you, who wouldn't show interest, and then acting like you're dramatic for wanting to talk about it. It was the humiliating loop of trying and being turned down until you stopped trying. It was the way it made me question my worth. It also made me question what the relationship even was. Because if you can't talk openly about sex, if you can't be honest about needs, if your partner shuts you down with contempt and shame, then it's not just a libido mismatch. It's a lack of partnership. It's a lack of emotional safety. It's a lack of care. A mismatch can be worked through when there is honesty and compassion. Two people can have different drives and still have a healthy relationship if they respect each other, communicate gently, and try to find solutions together. But what we had wasn't two people trying. What we had was me trying and him shutting me down. I was the one doing all the emotional labor around it. I was the one taking the hits of rejection. I was the one trying to find solutions. I was the one trying to keep connection alive. And when I finally said out loud what I needed, he didn't meet me with empathy. He met me with judgment. That was the moment something in me changed, not in a dramatic, screaming way, but in a quiet way. The kind of change where you suddenly realize you've been fighting for something alone. The kind of change where the fog lifts just enough for you to see the truth clearly. This isn't going to get better, because he doesn't want it to get better. Or at least, he doesn't want to do the work to make it better, and he doesn't care enough about my pain to treat it gently. It wasn't the no that ended it. It was the way he treated me when I asked. It was the contempt. It was the shaming. It was the dismissal. It was the way he tried to make me feel insane and disrespectful for wanting a real conversation about a real problem. So I left him the next day. From the outside, that might sound impulsive, but it wasn't. It was the result of a long buildup, a long erosion of confidence and connection. It was the result of months, maybe years, of trying to reach a locked door. It was the result of feeling unwanted and then being punished for speaking about it. It was the result of realizing that I was not going to heal inside that relationship because the relationship itself was the wound. And leaving that quickly actually makes sense because there are moments where you finally see the truth so clearly that staying becomes impossible. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop making excuses. You stop trying to twist yourself into a shape that fits someone who doesn't want to meet you. You stop hoping that if you just try harder, you'll earn basic care. You realize you're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person. For so long, I had been trying to become more desirable, more exciting, more whatever, as if my value depended on whether he wanted me. But the truth is, my worth wasn't the question. The question was whether he was capable of being a partner who could handle honesty, who could treat my needs with respect, who could have a difficult conversation without turning it into shame. And he wasn't. He could say no to sex and still want to control my sexuality. He could shut me out physically and still act like I was wrong for wanting closeness. He could refuse intimacy and still demand that I stay loyal to a dynamic that left me lonely. He could reject me repeatedly and then act offended when I tried to find solutions. That is not love. That is not partnership. That is control mixed with indifference. When I left, it wasn't because I was horny. It wasn't because I was selfish. It wasn't because I couldn't handle a dry spell. I left because I was being made to feel crazy for wanting connection. I left because I was doing all the emotional work alone. I left because I could feel myself shrinking in that relationship and I didn't want to disappear. There's also a painful kind of relief that comes when you finally walk away from constant rejection because you stop waking up hoping today will be different. You stop getting your hopes up over small moments. You stop bracing for another no. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's desire. You stop trying to earn what should be freely given in a healthy relationship. You start remembering that you're allowed to want things. You're allowed to want intimacy. You're allowed to want to feel desired. You're allowed to talk about sex without being shamed. You're allowed to problem solve without being called disrespectful. You're allowed to leave when your needs are treated like an inconvenience. And the biggest truth that settled in afterward was this: a relationship can survive a lot, but it cannot survive contempt. It cannot survive one person refusing to engage while the other person bends themselves into knots trying to keep connection alive. It cannot survive someone turning honest communication into shame. It cannot survive a partner who treats your loneliness like it's your character flaw. I stayed as long as I did because I kept believing there had to be a way to fix it. I kept believing if I just tried harder, if I just looked better, if I just approached it differently, if I just gave him enough space, if I just waited long enough, he would come back to me. But that belief was slowly breaking me because it was based on the idea that I had to earn basic desire and care. The day I left, I finally stopped bargaining with myself. I finally accepted what my body had been trying to tell me for a long time. That locked door wasn't temporary, it was the relationship. And I didn't want to spend my life knocking on a door that only opened to let me be rejected again. So I chose myself. I chose clarity. I chose dignity. I chose the reality that wanting connection is not wrong, and asking for solutions is not disrespectful. I chose not to let someone else's indifference reshape my confidence any further. I wasn't asking for too much. I was just asking the wrong person. I don't even think it started as some dramatic, obvious hatred either. It started in that quieter place where you realize you're asking for something basic, something reasonable, and the person who's supposed to care about you is acting like you're a nuisance. I was pregnant with our second kid, and my sense of smell was insanely strong. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, but pregnancy smells can feel like they're screaming at you. Normal household smells suddenly become unbearable. Things other people barely notice can make you gag. The smell of the litter box wasn't just gross, It was overwhelming to me. It felt like it filled the whole house, like it was in my nose even when I tried to escape it. It got to the point where I would literally eat in my daughter's bedroom because the smell felt so strong in the rest of the house. That's not dramatic. That's survival. That's me trying to get food down without my stomach turning. So I asked him to clean it. Not because I was trying to boss him around. Not because I was being lazy. Not because I thought chores were beneath me. I asked because I was pregnant. Because my body was reacting in a way I couldn't control. And because it was a simple, normal thing for a partner to help with. The kind of small teamwork thing that shouldn't even be an issue. You don't need a deep conversation about it. You don't need a fight. You just do it because your partner is struggling and you live in the same home. But every time I asked, he gave me attitude. That's what builds the anger in a person. Not just the fact that the chore didn't get done, but the attitude attached to it, the way he made it feel like you were asking for something unreasonable, like you were being annoying, like you were nagging, like he was doing you some big favor instead of just contributing to the basic functioning of the house, especially while you were literally growing a child. Eventually, I got so tired of asking and being met with that same disrespect that I just snapped and said, "Forget it, I'll fucking clean it." And then you did, while pregnant. Again and again, you bent down, you scooped, you breathed through it, you tried not to gag, you tried not to get angry, you tried to just get it over with. And every time you did it, that deep anger and disbelief grew. Because it wasn't really about the litter box. It was about what it represented. It represented how willing he was to let you suffer over something simple. It represented how little he cared that you were uncomfortable. It represented how quickly he could turn a reasonable request into a power struggle. It represented how much he expected you to carry, even while pregnant, even while your body was already under strain, even while you were doing one of the most physically demanding things a person can do. And it's also the kind of moment that sticks because it's so avoidable. This wasn't a complicated problem. This wasn't a huge sacrifice. It wasn't something that required money or planning or special skills. It was a few minutes with a trash bag. It was something so small that his refusal, and especially his attitude, starts to feel personal. Like, if you can't do this, what will you do when things get hard? If you can't show care here, where else are you going to abandon me? If you can't handle a litter box, how are we going to handle the real weight of life together? That's why the anger grew deeper instead of fading. Because each time it happened, it added another layer to the same realization. He was being unbelievably careless and selfish over something so simple. And when you're pregnant, you don't just feel things emotionally. You feel them in your whole body. Your patience is thinner because you're already exhausted. Your nervous system is more sensitive. You're already giving so much just by existing in that state. So when the person next to you refuses to do one small thing to make life easier, it doesn't just annoy you. It feels like betrayal in miniature. It feels like being left alone in the partnership, one tiny moment at a time. I think that's why you said you know he didn't hate you the entire time, but those moments made something shift. Because repeated selfishness like that changes how you see someone. It changes how safe they feel. It changes how much you trust them to be there for you when it matters. It turns love into resentment, slowly, through 1,000 little choices where they could have shown care and didn't. And the worst part is how predictable the cycle becomes. You ask, he acts irritated. You back down, you do it yourself. The task gets done, so he learns he can keep acting that way. He learns that his attitude works. He learns that if he makes it unpleasant enough, you'll stop asking. And you're left not only doing the work, but also carrying the emotional weight of realizing you shouldn't have to fight for help in the first place. That deep anger and disbelief you felt wasn't you being dramatic. It was your mind trying to protect you. It was your instincts saying, this is not what partnership is supposed to feel like. This is not what care looks like. This is not what love looks like when someone is truly on your team. Because love, real love, would have been him noticing your discomfort and cleaning it without being asked twice. Real love would have been him saying, of course, I've got it, and doing it quickly, not with attitude. Real love would have been him caring more about your well-being than about avoiding an unpleasant chore. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for something basic, and the fact that he made you feel like you were asking for too much is exactly why that anger grew into something deeper. We had a pet we both loved, and when they got very ill, it wasn't one of those situations where you can pretend it's fine and hope it passes. It was real suffering. The kind you can see in their eyes. The kind you can hear in their breathing. The kind where they stop doing the little things that used to make them themselves. And when you love an animal, watching that decline is its own kind of heartbreak because they can't explain what hurts. They just endure quietly until you're the one who has to make the unbearable call. I agonized over it. I wanted to give them as much time and love as possible. Because that's what you do when you're attached to a living thing that trusts you. You try to stretch the good days. You measure everything. You questioned yourself constantly. Are they still enjoying anything? Are they eating? Are they resting comfortably? Are they wagging their tail, purring, greeting you, finding a sunny spot, showing any sign that life still feels good? And every time there was a tiny good moment, it made the decision harder because you want to believe you can buy them more time. But then the pain becomes undeniable. It reaches a point where the extra time you're fighting for is no longer time for them. It's time for you. And that's a horrible realization to sit with. Because you love them so much that you'd rather take on the pain yourself than let them suffer. So you make the decision you never wanted to make, not because you want to lose them, but because you cannot stand watching them hurt. You knew it was time. You made the difficult decision to let them go humanely. That decision, even when it's clearly the right one, can make you feel guilty, like you're choosing an ending. But really, you're choosing mercy. You're choosing to carry the heartbreak so they don't have to carry the pain. And in a healthy relationship, that kind of moment is shared. Not because it becomes easier, but because grief is not meant to be carried alone. A loving partner goes with you. They sit beside you. They hold you up when your legs feel weak. They look at the pet and say goodbye too. They take on some of the weight so you don't have to hold every ounce of it by yourself. He refused to take that final trip to the vet with me. That refusal matters, not just because it left you physically alone in the room, but because it forced you to be the only person making the last decision, the only person holding the moment, the only person walking out afterward with that hollow, stunned feeling of having done something heartbreaking, even though it was merciful. You were the one who had your pet euthanized. You were the one who heard the vet's voice. You were the one who watched the final breath. You were the one who drove home afterward with that silence, that emptiness, that sense that the world is still moving even though something inside you has stopped. That is not a small thing to be left alone for. It's the kind of memory that stays in your body. It's the kind of moment where, even years later, you can still remember the smell of the room, the sound of the door, the way your hands felt, the way time moved. And because he refused to be there, it meant you didn't just grieve the pet. You also grieved the absence of your partner in the exact moment when partnership should have shown itself most clearly. Then, later, the cruelty reached an even worse level. The next time he got angry with you, he accused you of killing his pet. That accusation is so unfair and so manipulative that it almost doesn't even deserve to be called an argument. It was a weapon. He took the most painful, selfless choice you had made. The choice you made because the pet was suffering. The choice you made because someone had to do it and he refused. And he twisted it into something ugly so he could hurt you. He didn't say, "I miss them." He didn't say, "I hate that we had to do that." He didn't say, "I wish I had been there." He didn't say, "I feel guilty for not going." He didn't own his part. He didn't touch his own shame. Instead, he poured it onto you and called it your fault, because that's what that accusation really was. It was him pushing his guilt and grief and discomfort onto you so he could avoid feeling it himself. If he admitted the truth that he refused to come, that he left you to do it alone, he would have to sit with how cowardly and selfish that was. He would have to face himself. So he did what people like that do. He rewrote the story so he could be the victim and you could be the villain. And he added that possessive word too, his pet, as if you weren't grieving too, as if your love didn't count, as if your pain wasn't real, as if you weren't the person who stayed present at the end, the person who carried the responsibility he refused to carry. He claimed ownership when it was convenient for blame, even though he refused to show up when ownership would have required compassion. That kind of accusation doesn't just hurt, it contaminates the grief. It takes a sacred, sorrowful moment and stains it with betrayal. It makes you feel like something you did out of love is being used against you. It makes you feel like your kindness can be turned into evidence in a case he's building against you whenever he feels angry. And it makes you question everything about who you're with. Because someone who truly loved you would never use that moment to punish you. Even if they were heartbroken, even if they were angry at the situation, even if grief made them messy, a loving partner would not say you killed the pet. Not when they know the pet was suffering. Not when they know euthanasia is mercy. Not when they know they refused to be there. Not when they know how hard it was for you. To say that is to willingly stab at the most vulnerable place in you. I understand why you feel like something shifted after that. Like you weren't in a great place before, but that moment was a turning point. Because what he did wasn't a normal grief reaction. It was character. It was cruelty. It was a willingness to hurt you on purpose, using the deepest pain available. It also makes sense that you believe that was the moment he truly started to hate you, or at least the moment he started treating you like an enemy. Sometimes people can tolerate a relationship being messy when everyone is pretending. But when something real happens, when life demands a serious, moral decision, the mask slips. And if he was already resentful, already selfish, already emotionally immature, that moment may have activated something in him, something dark. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you took on responsibility he didn't want to take on. You did the hard thing. You did the adult thing. You did the compassionate thing. And that kind of integrity can make a bitter person feel exposed. It can make them feel small. It can make them feel ashamed. And rather than face shame, they convert it into blame. So he blamed you. He accused you. He made you carry not only the grief, but the guilt he didn't want to feel. The truth is, you didn't kill your pet. You released them from pain. You gave them a peaceful ending when their body was failing them. You did what loving owners do when love means mercy, not selfishness. And you did it alone because he refused to show up. If anyone should have been ashamed in that story, it wasn't you. And if that moment became the point where you realized the relationship was beyond repair, it makes sense. Because when someone can take your heartbreak and turn it into a weapon, it means they're not a safe person to grieve with. They're not a safe person to live with either. It means that in your most vulnerable moments, instead of being held, you will be blamed. Instead of being supported, you will be attacked. Instead of being seen, you will be accused. That's not a partner. That's an adversary. And I'm so sorry you had to carry that ending alone and then carry his cruelty on top of it. You deserved someone who would have sat beside you at the vet, cried with you, and thanked you afterward for doing the hardest thing out of love. You deserved someone who would have shared the grief instead of twisting it into a knife. He didn't even try to hide it in a way that would make it harder to prove. That's what makes it feel so insulting when I look back. He started having an emotional affair right in my face, like he wanted me to see just enough to doubt myself, but not enough to be able to call it out without a fight. We worked at the same place. Our desks were close. I was right there. I didn't have to go looking for anything. I heard it. I heard his phone slap the counter every time I walked by, like he was quickly flipping it face down or tossing it away so I wouldn't see what was on the screen. That sound became its own kind of signal, like my nervous system started recognizing it before my brain even finished the thought. It was that constant little reminder that there was something happening that he didn't want me to be part of. And when I said something, when I tried to name what I was seeing, he gave me the classic excuse. He told me it was normal to check up on friends, like I was being unreasonable, like I was being controlling, like I was making something out of nothing. But checking up on friends doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like constant, secretive messaging from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. It doesn't look like hiding your phone every time your partner walks past. It doesn't look like panic when you get asked a simple question. It doesn't look like someone being more emotionally engaged with a screen than with the person sitting next to them in real life. And you said it perfectly. Girl, from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. is cheating. That's not a friendship. That's a relationship being built in real time with someone else in the same hours you're living your actual life together. That's constant attention. That's intimacy. That's priority. That's choosing someone else's connection over your partner's peace and respect. The worst part is how he tried to normalize it. People like that always try to make you feel dramatic for noticing the obvious. They want you to believe your intuition is insecurity. They want you to believe your discomfort is jealousy. They want you to believe you're the one who needs to work on yourself, when really you're responding to something real. Months later, when we came back from that 2-week trip for his new job, it got worse, because secrecy always grows when someone is already lying. We had a disagreement about packing, and it wasn't even some huge relationship-ending fight. It was normal life stuff, but it was made harder because he was lazy and you were tired. You were doing the work, carrying the load, and he was acting like it was nothing. Then he left you home, and he told you he was with a guy friend, but he sneaked out after and went to see her behind your back until 2 a.m. That detail matters because it shows intention. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't him forgetting to text. It wasn't him losing track of time. He lied about who he was with. He left in a way that was designed to mislead you. He spent the night with her and then tried to come back and act like nothing happened. And on top of that, he turned his location off. That's the part that always stands out in situations like this, because people don't turn their location off when they're doing something innocent. They turn it off because they know exactly what it looks like. They turn it off because they're hiding. They turn it off because they're trying to buy themselves time. And you noticed it the morning after. That little moment of getting up and realizing something is wrong, realizing there's a gap where there shouldn't be a gap, realizing you're being played. It makes your stomach drop, because now you're not just dealing with suspicion. You're dealing with proof that he was actively covering his tracks. But even then, you had to be careful about when you confronted him, because you already knew the rules of being with him. If you brought it up in public, everything would become your fault for creating a scene. That's another form of control. It means you don't get to speak in the moment. You don't get to respond naturally. You don't get to be a person. You have to wait until you're alone, until it's safe, until he can't accuse you of embarrassing him. And even then, he can still twist it. But you learned that bringing things up in public would just become another weapon against you. So you held it in. You confronted him after a long day. And there was also that mushroom trip for his brother's birthday, which adds this surreal layer because you're already exhausted, already emotionally raw. And now you're trying to have a serious conversation with someone whose mind is not even fully present. But you did it anyway, because you couldn't keep swallowing it. You couldn't keep pretending. And when you confronted him, he got cold sweats. That image is so telling. Cold sweats aren't the reaction of someone who is simply misunderstood. Cold sweats are panic. Cold sweats are, I'm caught. Cold sweats are the body realizing it has to come up with a lie fast enough to cover the truth. He was trying to figure out how to lie to you in real time. That's what broke something in you, I think. Not just the cheating itself, but the way you could physically see the deception, the way you could see him scrambling, the way you could see his mind working, not on how to repair the hurt he caused, but on how to protect himself from consequences. It makes you feel numb because it forces you to face the truth clearly. This person is not loyal. This person is not honest. This person is not safe emotionally. This person will look you in the eye and lie if it benefits them. So you went numb, and you left him about a month later. I understand that numbness so well, because sometimes leaving doesn't come with a big explosive moment. Sometimes it comes when your nervous system finally gets too tired to keep reacting. Sometimes your heart stops trying to argue with reality. You just go quiet inside, and you start pulling your energy back, piece by piece, until one day you're gone. Even after all that, he still tried to say they were just friends. That's the part that makes you laugh in that sharp way, because it's such a ridiculous lie, and yet they cling to it like it's a magic spell. They want the social benefit of saying nothing happened, even while they're actively building a relationship with someone else. They want to keep their hands clean in the story, so they can paint you as dramatic, jealous, paranoid, unreasonable. They want to keep the label cheater off themselves, so they can keep their self-image intact. But the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when it's been obvious the whole time. They're together now, and that doesn't feel like closure so much as confirmation. Confirmation that your intuition wasn't a flaw. Confirmation that your discomfort wasn't insecurity. Confirmation that the phone slapping down, the constant messaging, the late-night guy-friend lie, the location being turned off, the cold sweats, all of it was exactly what you thought it was. I should have followed my intuition. is such a common sentence after something like this, and it carries a lot of grief inside it. Grief for the time you gave. Grief for the energy you spent trying to be reasonable while he was being dishonest. Grief for the years you lost to someone who wasn't even brave enough to tell the truth. But I also want you to hear this. You weren't wrong for trying to trust someone you loved. You weren't wrong for not wanting to accuse without proof. You weren't wrong for hoping he would respect you enough to stop. That doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. What was wrong was that he took advantage of your humanity. You wasted years with a liar and a manipulator. Yes, and it's okay to be angry about that. It's okay to mourn it. It's okay to feel embarrassed, even though you don't deserve to be. But your intuition didn't fail. Your intuition was working the whole time. You heard the phone slap down. You noticed the hours. You noticed the lies. You noticed the location. You noticed his body panicking when confronted. The only reason it took time to leave is because manipulation always comes with fog. They create confusion on purpose. They make you question yourself. They punish you for bringing things up. They force you to choose the right moment to speak. They wear you down until you're too tired to keep fighting for basic honesty. And then one day the fog lifts and you walk away. That's what you did. You didn't lose because you didn't catch him fast enough. You saved yourself the moment you finally stopped accepting the lie. I got in a car accident just a couple blocks from our old apartment and ended up with a concussion that was bad enough to turn everything into a blur. It wasn't the kind of bump on the head where you rub it and move on. It was the kind that makes your body feel wrong, like your brain is trying to do its normal job but can't quite line things up. My vision was messed up. I had double vision. I felt disoriented and sick and shaky in that way that makes you realize something serious happened, even if you're still trying to stay calm on the outside. The cops told me someone had to sit with my car and wait for the tow truck to come pick it up. It wasn't optional. It was one of those practical rules where they're trying to keep the situation safe and controlled. I was already overwhelmed and not thinking clearly, and I remember feeling this wave of relief that at least I had a simple next step. I could call him. He was close. This would be one of those moments where a partner shows up without being asked twice. So I called him and asked him to come wait with me. I didn't ask him to solve the accident. I didn't ask him to argue with the police. I didn't ask him to magically make my concussion go away. I asked for the bare minimum. Come sit with me while I wait. Come be there. Come make sure I'm okay. Come help me not be alone on the side of the road while my brain is literally rattled. He told me he couldn't. Not because he was at work across town. Not because he was trapped in some emergency. Not because he had something unavoidable. He told me he couldn't come sit with me because he was waiting on a new computer part. A computer part. And then, as if that wasn't insulting enough, he tried to turn it into a lesson. He said adults had to do adult things sometimes, and I needed to be a big girl. That line is so gross, not just because it's dismissive, but because it flips reality upside down. He was using adulting to justify abandoning me in an emergency. He was acting like his comfort and his hobby and his package delivery were the real responsibilities, and my concussion was some childish inconvenience I needed to handle quietly, so I didn't disturb him. He wasn't speaking like a partner. He was speaking like a person who wanted to punish me for needing support. It's hard to describe how lonely it is to be sitting on the side of the road after a wreck, with your vision doubled, your head pounding, your nervous system on fire. and realize the person who is supposed to care the most can't be bothered to show up. There's a special kind of fear in that moment because concussions mess with your perception. You can't fully trust your body. You can't fully trust your brain. You can't even fully trust what you're seeing. You're trying to stay composed, but everything is swimming, and you're alone. And you weren't alone for 10 minutes. You weren't alone for a quick tow. You were alone for 4 hours. 4 hours on the side of the road with a concussion. 4 hours trying to keep yourself stable, trying to stay safe, trying to manage that double vision, trying to function with your nerves literally bruised badly enough that your eyes weren't working right. 4 hours of waiting while the world moved around you, and the person who could have made it bearable chose not to. Eventually the tow truck came, and when it was finally over, you took an Uber home. That detail hits hard because it shows how much you had to self-rescue. You were injured, shaken, and still had to manage the whole situation. You had to do the waiting, the talking, the logistics, and then you still had to find your own way home. It wasn't just the physical injury. It was the emotional injury of realizing that even in an obvious emergency, you could not rely on him. And I understand why you didn't break up with him immediately. People always imagine leaving is instant, like one event happens and you walk away cleanly. But when you're in it, you're often trying to make sense of it. You're often minimizing. You're often thinking, maybe he didn't realize how bad it was. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe he'll make it up later. Maybe this was a one-off. You're often trying to protect the relationship because you've already invested in it, and because admitting, this person doesn't care about me, is a terrifying truth to hold. But even if you didn't break up right then, your body remembered. Every time you passed that spot, you'd say it out loud. Oh, hey. There's the place where you left me alone on the side of the road for 4 hours with a concussion because you were waiting on a computer part. And honestly, that's not just sarcasm. That's your mind refusing to let the truth be rewritten. That's you keeping a marker in place. That's you saying, I will not pretend this didn't happen. I will not let you act like you're a good partner when I know what you did. I will not let my memory be softened for your comfort, because people like that love when time passes. They love when the moment fades. They love when you stop bringing it up. They love when you start doubting yourself. They love when you start saying, it wasn't that bad, because then they don't have to face what they did. Your little comment every time you drove by was your nervous system refusing to cooperate with that erasing. It's also telling that he used the phrase, be a big girl. That's not adult language. That's condescending, belittling language. It's the kind of language people use when they want to position themselves as superior and you as childish, even when you're the one dealing with the real world crisis. It's him trying to make your need for support seem embarrassing, so you'll stop asking. But needing support after a car accident isn't childish. It's normal. It's human. It's what any reasonable person would ask for. Even a friend would come sit with you. Even a neighbor would likely help. The fact that he refused over a computer part tells you something plain. His priorities were not you, and there's a harsh clarity in that. Because emergencies reveal who people really are. They reveal whether someone's love is real in practice or only real in words. When you're scared and injured, you shouldn't have to convince your partner that you matter. They should just show up. He didn't show up. So, the part of you that kept pointing at that spot later, the part of you that made it into a repeated line, wasn't being petty. It was being accurate. It was refusing denial. It was your self-respect tapping on the glass, saying, remember this. Remember who he is when you need him. Remember what he chooses when it's you versus his comfort. And even with the little at the end, I can feel the way you're holding both things at once. The humor that keeps you from screaming, and the sadness that you ever had to experience something like that in the first place. Because it's ridiculous, but it's also heartbreaking. It's ridiculous that a computer part mattered more than your concussion. And it's heartbreaking that you had to sit there alone and learn that lesson the hard way. You deserved someone who would have been running out the door the second you called. Someone who would have said, "Stay where you are, I'm coming," and meant it. Someone who would have sat next to you, held your hand, gotten you water, watched your symptoms, made sure you weren't alone in a vulnerable state. Someone who would have treated your injury like an emergency, not an inconvenience. What he gave you was abandonment dressed up as adulting. And your repeated line every time you passed that spot was your mind telling the truth, even when your heart hadn't fully caught up yet. I was driving home from a work event, absolutely wrecked. The kind of wrecked where your whole body feels heavy and your mind won't stop replaying one moment on a loop. I had made a very public mistake, televised, the kind of thing that doesn't just sting in the moment, but follows you afterward. Because you know people saw it. You know it might get talked about. You know it might live longer than it should in other people's memories, even if it's eating you alive in yours. I remember the heat of embarrassment, the way it sits under your skin, and that tight, sick feeling in your chest that comes when you're trying not to spiral, but you can't fully stop it. The drive was 2 hours, and it felt endless. 2 hours is long enough for panic to rise and fall and rise again. Long enough for the what-if thoughts to multiply. What if they think I'm incompetent? What if this hurts my reputation? What if my boss is disappointed? What if this is the clip people remember? What if I can't recover from this? Your mind becomes a courtroom, presenting evidence against you over and over, and you're stuck alone in a car with nowhere to put the fear. So, I called him. Not because I needed him to solve anything, not because I needed a speech. I called because I was shaken, and I wanted the simplest form of support. A familiar voice, a partner's presence, someone to say, "I'm here," or "That sounds awful," or even just sit with me while I drove, letting me talk it out so my brain didn't eat itself alive. That's what partners are supposed to be for. Not constant therapy, not endless emotional labor, but the basic human comfort of not being alone when you're falling apart. But he was irritated that I even called him. That part is so telling because it means my distress was not something he wanted to engage with. My pain was an interruption to his day, not something he cared about. And you can feel that immediately when someone answers the phone like they're doing you a favor. You can feel it in the short responses, the sighs, the lack of warmth, the way they don't ask questions. You can feel that you're talking into a wall, and even though you're trying to stay composed, it makes the shame sharper, because now you're not only embarrassed about what happened at work, you're embarrassed that you're bothering the person who's supposed to want to be there. Mid-call, at some point, he blew up. It wasn't a gentle, frustrated, "I don't know what to say." It wasn't him admitting he felt helpless. It was anger. It was contempt. And he said, "Why didn't you just stay up there and whine to your coworkers?" That sentence is cruel in a very specific way, because it's not just dismissive, it's humiliating. It takes what you're feeling and turns it into something pathetic. It reframes your pain as whining, like you're being dramatic. You're annoying, like your feelings are childish. it also carries that ugly message underneath it. Your emotions are not welcome with me. Take them somewhere else. Don't bring them here. And then he hung up on me. Just cut me off while I was driving, while I was already shaken, while I was trying to keep it together on a long, dark stretch of road with my mind spinning. That act of hanging up wasn't just ending a conversation. It was abandonment in the middle of a vulnerable moment. It was him choosing to leave me alone with my fear, and choosing to do it with irritation, like I had done something wrong by needing comfort. When I got home, I realized something that felt obvious and devastating at the same time. He was never there for me, not in the ways that matter, not in the small daily ways where you share your day and feel heard, not in the big ways where you need someone steady, not in the moments of fear, not in the moments of joy, not in the moments where you just want to be close. Talking to him about my day, my fears, my joy, or my feelings was simply of no interest to him. That's such a painful realization because it's not one single incident. It's the pattern that incident reveals. A partner who truly cares might not always have the perfect response, but they don't treat you like an inconvenience for being human. They don't mock you for needing support. They don't call your hurt whining. They don't hang up on you when you're already fragile. The way he spoke to me in that moment showed me that he didn't see our relationship as a done place where my inner world mattered. He saw it as a space where his comfort mattered, his mood mattered, his time mattered, and my feelings were only acceptable if they were quiet and easy and required nothing. That 2-hour drive became a kind of mirror, not because of the work mistake, but because of what happened after it. The mistake hurt, yes, but the way he reacted took something already painful and made it lonelier. It taught me that in his eyes, my struggles weren't something to support, they were something to avoid. And once you see that clearly, you start realizing how many times you've been alone in the relationship while technically not alone at all. It's a strange grief, realizing you've been sharing your life with someone who isn't interested in your life. Because when a partner truly cares, your bad day matters to them. Your joy matters to them. Your fear matters to them. They might not always understand the details, but they want to understand you. They want to be the person you can call. They want to be your safe place, even if they're imperfect at it. He wasn't a safe place. He was the kind of person who made me feel like I should keep my emotions to myself, like needing support was embarrassing, like vulnerability was something I should hide because it would be punished with contempt. And once you realize that, it changes the way you look at everything. It changes the way you remember other conversations, other moments where you tried to share and he shut it down. Other times you felt excited and he seemed bored. Other times you were scared and he was irritated. It becomes clear that it wasn't just one bad phone call. It was a truth about who he was as a partner. He wasn't there, not when it counted. And as painful as that is to admit, it's also clarifying. Because it means the emptiness you felt wasn't you being too emotional or too needy. It was a normal human need, being able to talk to the person you love, meeting someone who simply didn't care to meet it. That's not your flaw. That's the relationship showing you its limit. When I finally asked him why he just stared at me when I cried, I wasn't asking because I wanted a perfect, comforting speech. I wasn't asking because I needed some big romantic gesture. I was asking because it had become impossible to ignore what kept happening. There was a pattern, and my body was starting to recognize it, even when my mind was still trying to explain it away. He said, "I'm waiting for you to get to the part where you make it better in your head." That sentence is cold in a very specific way. It isn't a clumsy attempt at support. It isn't a man who doesn't know how to handle emotions. It's someone admitting, without shame, that he expects you to do the emotional labor after he hurts you. He expects you to cry, break down, and then do the work of calming yourself, reframing the situation, and returning to him in a more convenient state. He expects you to do the mental gymnastics so he doesn't have to take responsibility for what he just did. It was like he was saying, I'll wait while you fix this inside yourself. Not I'll fix what I did. Not I'll comfort you. Not I'm sorry. Just I'll wait for you to become manageable again. That's the moment everything clicked for me too, because once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. You suddenly look back at every argument and see the same shape over and over. He would start it. He would snap first. He would scream first. He would be the one who lit the fuse. And then when your body finally couldn't hold it anymore and you cried, he would go quiet. He would stop, not because he felt remorse, but because he'd reached the part of the cycle he wanted. He'd just watch you with that dead look in his eyes. And if it were just once, you might have told yourself it was shock or discomfort or immaturity. But it wasn't just once. It was a pattern, a consistent response. A dead that wasn't confusion, but control. It felt like he was observing you, measuring you, waiting for the moment you shifted from hurt into self-correction. Waiting for the moment you began to undo the harm he caused by doing the work for him. Because that's what you always did. You always did the mental gymnastics. You always tried to understand his feelings. You always found the angle that made his behavior make sense. You always compromised. You always came back toward him, even when he was the one who pushed you away emotionally first. And the more you did it, the more you trained him too. You trained him that he could explode, and you would be the one to pick up the pieces. You trained him that he didn't have to apologize, because eventually you would soften, you would blame yourself, you would find some reason it wasn't that bad. You would meet him halfway even when he hadn't moved an inch. But then it got so absurd, so petty, so cruel, that your mind couldn't keep doing the gymnastics without breaking. You were crying because he was screaming at you for not thanking his mother right away, for holding the door open for you. That's such a small, normal, everyday thing. A door, a simple moment. Something that could have been nothing. Something that most people would shrug off. Maybe you said thank you a second later. Maybe you smiled. Maybe you were distracted. Maybe you were carrying something. Maybe you were tired. Any normal partner would either not notice at all, or they'd mention it gently later if they even cared. But screaming at you until you cried over something like that isn't about manners. It isn't about gratitude. It's about power. He used anything he could use. Anything. Because the point wasn't the topic. The point was the feeling he got from putting you under him. And that's why that thought finally crossed your mind, the one that is terrifying to admit when you're still inside it. Maybe he liked watching you cry. That's not a thought you want to have about someone you love. That thought goes against everything you want to believe about the relationship. Because if he likes your pain, then there is no misunderstanding to fix. There is no communication technique that will repair it. There is no, if I just explain it better solution. If he likes causing pain, then pain is the goal, not an accident. So you asked him, and he answered. His answer wasn't a denial. It wasn't discomfort. It wasn't him suddenly realizing he'd been cruel. It was him basically confirming the role he expected you to play. You cry, then you soothe yourself, then you return to him as if nothing happened. You make it better in your head. You fix it. You carry it. You swallow it. And that answer, is the moment you realize the truth you didn't want to name before. The only thing he loved was causing you pain and watching you take it. Not love in the real sense, not care, not partnership, not mutual respect. He loved control. He loved impact. He loved the feeling of having the power to break you and then watch you repair yourself in front of him, like he was watching a performance. He loved the imbalance. He loved being the one who could scream and then sit there calm while you fell apart. He loved being the one who didn't have to do any emotional work because you would do it for both of you. That's why his stare felt dead, because empathy wasn't there. It wasn't even trying to show up. And I think that's what makes moments like this linger in someone's mind for years. Because you can forget the exact details of some arguments, but you don't forget the moment you realize the pain is intentional. You don't forget the moment you realize the cycle is a routine he benefits from. You don't forget the moment you realize your tears don't soften him, they satisfy him. It changes how you see the past too. You start rewatching old moments in your mind and you recognize the pattern you couldn't fully name while you were living it. You recognize how often you apologized when you weren't the one who harmed. You recognize how often you tried to explain yourself calmly while he escalated. You recognize how often you compromised while he demanded. You recognize how often you carried the emotional weight alone, and how he learned to rely on your softness as his escape from accountability. And you also start seeing how he used crying as the end of the argument. Not because crying meant he cared, but because crying meant you were broken open. Crying meant you were vulnerable. Crying meant you were more likely to stop fighting for yourself and start pleading for peace. Crying meant you were more likely to reach for repair, and he didn't have to reach at all. That's why his answer was so chilling, because it wasn't just a rude comment. It was the blueprint. I'm not going to pretend that realizing something like that is easy. It's not. It's a grief all its own, because you're not just grieving the relationship. You're grieving the belief that the relationship was ever based on mutual care. You're grieving the person you thought he was. You're grieving the time you spent trying to meet him halfway when he wasn't even walking in the same direction. You're grieving all the times you cried and then blamed yourself for it. All the times you tried to make it better in your head because you thought that was what love required. But the clarity matters, even though it hurts. Because once you see that the pain is the point, you stop asking yourself what you did wrong. You stop trying to find the perfect words. You stop thinking if you just explain it calmly enough, he'll understand. Someone like that understands. They just don't care. Or worse, they care in the wrong direction. They care about what they get from hurting you. And that's why, when you say the only thing he loved was causing me pain and watching me take it, it doesn't sound like an exaggeration. It sounds like a summary. It sounds like the final truth you reached after doing far too much mental work for someone who refused to do any of his own. You weren't crying because you were weak. You were crying because you were being pushed past normal human limits. You were crying because your body was reacting to being screamed at, controlled, degraded, and emotionally cornered. Tears are a nervous system response. They are not a failure. They are your body trying to release what you can't hold anymore. And him sitting there, waiting for you to make it better in your head, is not the behavior of a partner. It's the behavior of someone who wants the benefits of a relationship without the responsibility of being emotionally safe. You deserved someone who, when you cried, moved toward you. Someone who softened. Someone who apologized. Someone who held your face gently and asked what you needed. someone who cared more about your well-being than about winning an argument. Someone who did not start fights and then watch your pain like it was entertainment. The fact that you noticed the pattern and named it is powerful. It means the spell broke. It means you stopped doing the gymnastics. It means you finally allowed yourself to ask the question your instincts had been screaming for a long time. And his answer, as horrible as it was, gave you the truth. Not the truth you wanted, but the truth that sets you free. When I finally said I thought we needed to separate, he didn't look at me like a person who had reached the end of her strength. He didn't look surprised or scared or even curious about what had pushed me there. He didn't ask me what I needed or what I was feeling or how long I'd been carrying the thought around in silence. He didn't ask what he could do to save anything or whether I was safe or whether I was okay. He went straight to a sentence that told me exactly how he saw me and how little he understood what I had been doing every day for years. He said, "You know this means you're going to have to adult more, right?" The way he said it wasn't gentle. It wasn't concerned. It was almost smug, like he was delivering some life lesson to a careless teenager. Like I was someone who had been floating through life, protected from real responsibility, and now I was about to be hit with the harsh truth of the world. It was the kind of comment meant to scare me back into place, to make me doubt myself, to make me think separation would be too hard because I wasn't capable. It was meant to turn my one moment of clarity into a weakness. And the thing is, if anyone had actually seen my life up close, even for one full week, they would have known how absurd it was. The truth was the exact opposite of what he was implying. I wasn't avoiding adulthood. I was drowning in it. For the record, I was a stay-at-home mom to his 2 kids. Not in the dreamy Pinterest version, where you have time to bake cookies and take cute photos and sip coffee while the house stays peaceful. I was a stay-at-home mom in a house where the responsibilities weren't normal hard. They were relentless and heavy and high stakes. One of those children was diagnosed with cancer as a toddler. I still struggle to describe what that does to you because it changes your definition of fear. It's not a vague worry. It's not a bad day. It's a whole different world where hospital schedules replace normal routines, where your mind learns medical words you never wanted to know, where you measure time in scans and blood tests and appointments, where you learn what it means to wait for results while trying to act normal for a child who just wants comfort. It's the kind of reality where you can be standing in the kitchen making a meal, and suddenly your chest tightens because you remember the sound of a monitor, the smell of a hospital hallway, the look on a doctor's face when they're trying to be careful with words. It's the kind of reality where you have to become strong on command because breaking down doesn't stop the next appointment from coming. And the other child was diagnosed with autism, and it wasn't mild. It wasn't the kind of situation where you can just say, "Oh, she's a little quirky," and everything runs smoothly. Her needs were significant, and they were constant. They required planning. They required structure. They required patience that you don't even realize you have until you're forced to use it every day. They required me to be calm even when I was exhausted, because a change in my tone could change the entire day. They required me to learn triggers and routines, to anticipate meltdowns before they hit full force, to advocate, to educate myself, to keep the environment stable, to manage appointments and school conversations and therapies and paperwork and logistics, and then still come home and do the regular things that keep a household standing. I was good at it. I was so good at it that people didn't always realize how hard it was, because I made it look manageable. I made it look like it was under control. I didn't do that because it was easy. I did it because the kids needed stability, and I was the stability. I became the one who could predict what would set her off, the one who could soothe her, the one who could help her through moments that would overwhelm other people. I became the translator between her needs and the world. I became the structure and the comfort and the plan. When you live like that, you don't get to not adult. You don't get to drift through the day. You don't get to switch off. You are always on. You are always managing. You are always calculating what needs to happen next, what can go wrong, what has to be prevented, what has to be handled quietly, what has to be handled immediately. You become the person who keeps everything from collapsing. That's who I was in that home. I gave that man everything I had, physically, emotionally, and financially. And I know some people here stay-at-home mom and assume there was no financial contribution, but anyone who has lived it knows that keeping a household running, especially with high needs, is work that saves money constantly. It's work that prevents bigger costs. It's work that takes energy you would otherwise have to pay someone else to provide. It is labor, and it is valuable, and it is real. Physically, I gave my time and my body to the constant demands of caregiving. I gave my sleep. I gave my ability to rest. I gave my health in a lot of ways because chronic stress doesn't leave your body untouched. Emotionally, I gave everything you give when you're holding a family together. I gave patience. I gave reassurance. I gave encouragement. I gave calm. I gave attention. I gave the parts of myself that needed to be saved for me because I believed the family needed them more. And financially, I gave what I could, in every way I could. Sometimes it was direct money. Sometimes it was the invisible financial support of managing everything so the household didn't fall into chaos, so things didn't get missed, so the kids got what they needed, so appointments happened, so therapies happened, so the home was functional enough that life could continue. My work made his work possible. My structure made his freedom possible. But when I finally said we needed to separate, he acted like I was the one about to face reality for the first time. That comment didn't come out of nowhere. It matched the way he had treated me for a long time. He never noticed what I did. Or maybe he noticed, but he didn't value it. Maybe he noticed, but he needed to pretend it didn't count, because if it counted, then he would have to face what he owed me. If it counted, then he would have to admit he benefited from me every single day. If it counted, then he would have to stop seeing himself as the only one doing anything meaningful. He used to tell me I was never the giver. That line is still hard to wrap my mind around because it was so disconnected from reality that it almost felt like a deliberate cruelty. Like he knew it would hit a nerve. Like he knew it would make me question myself. Like he was trying to reframe the story so he could stay comfortable, so he could stay superior, so he could justify the way he didn't show up. Because if I wasn't the giver, then he didn't have to feel guilty about taking. If I wasn't the giver, then he could ignore the daily sacrifices without acknowledging them. If I wasn't the giver, then he could keep the narrative that he was the one carrying everything, even while I was the one doing the actual carrying. Over time, living with someone like that starts to mess with your sense of reality. You start doubting yourself in small ways. You start wondering if you're being dramatic. You start asking yourself if what you do actually matters. You start feeling like you have to prove your labor, like you have to earn credit for things that should be obvious. It's exhausting. It drains you. It makes you feel unseen in the place where you should be most seen. The truth is, I wasn't asking him to worship me. I wasn't asking for applause. I was asking for basic recognition that I was doing a lot and that it mattered. I was asking for partnership, for respect, for the feeling that I wasn't alone while carrying 2 children through serious challenges. But he didn't give that. He gave dismissal. He gave criticism. He gave the kind of comments that made it seem like I was lazy or immature, even while I was operating at a level of responsibility that most people never have to face. So when I said we needed to separate, it wasn't impulsive. It wasn't sudden. It was the result of a long buildup of being unseen. It was the result of giving everything and realizing the person receiving it was treating it like nothing. It was the result of realizing that my life had become a constant output, and in return I was getting contempt, or indifference, or a cold narrative that I was the problem. That day, when he said I'd have to adult more, I felt something snap into clarity. Not rage first, but clarity. Like, oh, this is how he has to see me in order to keep seeing himself the way he wants to see himself. He has to believe I'm not capable, because if I'm capable, then his disrespect looks worse. He has to believe I'm immature, because if I'm mature and competent, then his treatment of me has no excuse. He has to believe I don't do anything. Because if I do everything I've been doing, then he's been living off my labor while pretending he's above it. I realized that the comment wasn't about me at all. It was about his need to minimize me. It was about his fear of losing control. It was about his desire to make separation sound like a punishment for me instead of an escape from him. What he didn't understand is that I had already been adulting at a level that had nearly broken me. I had already been living the hard version of adulthood, the one where you don't get to pause when you're tired, where you don't get to collapse just because you're overwhelmed, where you keep going because children's needs don't wait. I had already been doing that without real support from him, because a partner who truly supports you sees your labor and shares the emotional weight. And if I'm being honest, I think he liked the version of life where I was stretched too thin to challenge him. He liked the version where I was busy managing everything and didn't have time to look up and realize how unfair it was. He liked the version where I was so exhausted that the idea of leaving felt impossible. He liked the version where he could tell himself I was lucky he stayed, even while I was the one holding the home together. That's why his comment didn't scare me into staying. It made me more certain I had to go. Because I understood, in that moment, that he wasn't just someone who failed to notice my efforts. He was someone who depended on not noticing them. He depended on erasing them because it protected his ego and kept the dynamic in place. There's a deep loneliness that comes from that. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of being deeply responsible and still treated like you're doing nothing. It makes you feel like you're shouting into a wall. It makes you feel like your life is invisible. It makes you feel like you could disappear and it still wouldn't register. Because the person isn't seeing you, they're seeing the role you play for them. And then, on top of everything, there was the way he talked about me as if I was the problem in other people's eyes too, like he needed to protect his image by making me look like the one who didn't contribute, the one who was lazy, the one who took. Because if he could convince others of that, he could convince himself. And if he could convince himself, he could keep living without guilt. When I finally spoke the words, "We need to separate," it wasn't because I hadn't tried. It was because I had tried until there was nothing left in me. I had tried by giving, by managing, by supporting, by carrying children through realities that would flatten a lot of people. I had tried by staying steady. I had tried by being the person who made things work. But I couldn't keep doing it for someone who insisted I was not the giver. I couldn't keep pouring myself into someone who treated my sacrifice like it was nothing. I couldn't keep living inside a narrative where the only way he could feel okay was by shrinking me. So I chose separation. And the moment I chose it, he reached for the same tool he always reached for. Disrespect disguised as truth. You'll have to adult more. It was laughable in a way, but it was also heartbreaking, because it showed me how deeply he had convinced himself of his version of reality. It showed me he would rather insult me than admit he benefited from me. It showed me he would rather pretend I was the problem than face his own failures as a partner. And it also reminded me of something important. When you've been carrying a household, especially with children who have serious needs, you develop strength that doesn't disappear when the marriage ends. If anything, separation often reveals how capable you really are, because suddenly you're not carrying a third weight, the constant emotional drain of being minimized. I know it can take time to process the anger that comes after, because when you're in survival mode, you don't always have the space to feel fully. Later, when you finally breathe, the anger shows up. The anger for what you tolerated. The anger for what was said to you. The anger for how invisible you were made to feel. The anger for every moment you were exhausted and still told you weren't the giver. That anger isn't wrong. It's your mind catching up to the truth. It's your self-respect returning. It's your body finally having enough safety to say, that was unfair, that was cruel, that was wrong. And for what it's worth, the way you carried those kids, the way you managed everything, the way you showed up through cancer and high needs and the constant pressure, that is adulthood in its most real form. That is responsibility in a way most people never have to prove. No smug comment from a man who couldn't see your labor gets to rewrite that. Also, on the part where you described exactly where he lives now, with identifying clues, I'm not going to repeat that or help narrow down a specific location, because you deserve space to vent without turning it into something that could point strangers toward a real person's address or neighborhood. What I can say is this. It makes sense that you feel furious and want the world to see what you endured. It makes sense that you want consequences. It makes sense that you want him to feel small the way he tried to make you feel small. But your story already delivers the truth more powerfully than any clue ever could. The truth is that you were doing the work of 3 adults inside one home, and he still tried to frame you as immature. The truth is that you gave everything, and he called you not a giver. The truth is that you carried children through realities that require strength most people don't understand, and he still had the audacity to suggest you didn't know how to adult. And the most important truth is that you finally chose yourself. You finally said the words. You finally stepped out of the role he trapped you in. You stopped letting him define what you were. You stopped letting him erase your effort. If he never noticed what you gave, it's not because it wasn't real. It's because noticing it would have forced him to respect you. And he didn't want to do that. You did the hardest kind of work, and you did it for years. You were the giver, whether he admits it or not. We were married for 12 years, long enough that our lives weren't just intertwined. They were built together. 12 years isn't a casual relationship you can shrug off like it didn't matter. It's routines, shared history, familiar jokes, quiet habits, hard seasons you get through, the kind of everyday life you don't even notice you're building until someone suddenly decides they don't want it anymore. I believed in the marriage. I believed in the idea that if something went wrong, we'd talk, we'd try, we'd work on it. I believed that after 12 years, if there was a problem, it would be treated like something we faced together. Then one day he suddenly announced he was no longer in love with me. He didn't ease into it. He didn't sit me down with compassion. He didn't say, "I've been struggling," or "I don't know what's happening to me," or "I feel disconnected and I want to work on it." It was an announcement, like he was reading a decision out loud that had already been made, and my job was to accept it. It felt like the ground disappeared under me. I was devastated in a way that is hard to describe, because it wasn't just sadness. It was shock. It was panic. It was grief for the life I thought we had. It was the desperate, humiliating feeling of being thrown out of a story I didn't even know was ending. I did what a lot of people do when they're blindsided like that. I tried to fix it. I asked what I could do. I asked what needed to change. I asked how we could make it better. I was looking at the 12 years we had built and thinking, there has to be a way to save this. I was still speaking like a spouse. I was still speaking like someone who believed commitment meant something. I was still treating him like a partner whose feelings mattered, because I hadn't yet realized he had already stopped treating me that way. At the time, I didn't know the whole truth. I didn't know that he was sleeping with someone 14 years younger than us. I didn't know that "I'm not in love anymore" wasn't the start of a conversation. It was a cover. It was a clean, easy sentence he could use to make himself sound honest and noble, like he was bravely admitting a hard truth, when really he was already involved with someone else and didn't want to face the reality of what that made him. When I found out later, it made everything click into place in the worst way. It explained the suddenness. It explained the coldness. It explained why he sounded so certain while I was falling apart. He wasn't confused. He wasn't wrestling with anything. He had already chosen a different life. He was just trying to exit the current one with as little inconvenience as possible. And that's where the part that still turns my stomach comes in. While I was devastated, while I was asking what I could do to fix our marriage, his only concern was what the divorce would cost him. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not as a family, not the pain it would cause, not what it would mean to tear apart 12 years. His concern was that if we divorced, he'd be stuck paying me for the rest of his life. That was what he focused on. It wasn't, "I'm sorry." It wasn't, "I hate that I'm hurting you." It wasn't, "I never wanted to destroy our life." It wasn't, "How are you going to be okay?" It was money. It was the idea of being financially tied to me like I was a punishment, like I was a bill he didn't want to pay. Like the most tragic thing that could happen to him wasn't the collapse of a marriage, but the inconvenience of supporting the woman he had promised to support. In that moment, I could feel myself being reduced. Not to a person, not to a wife, not to someone who had given 12 years of her life. I was reduced to a number in his head, a financial risk, a burden. And the thing is, it wasn't even like I wasn't working. I worked full time. I contributed. I showed up. I built a life with him. The only issue, in his mind, was that I didn't make as much money as he did. And because he cared so much about being rich, because he cared so much about status and wealth, he saw that difference as something he could use against me. Like it made me less worthy. Like it meant I was draining him. Like it meant I was a liability. That's what hurts so much about it when I look back. Not just the betrayal, not just the affair, but the way he revealed what he valued most. He valued money more than love. He valued being rich more than being decent. He valued protecting his bank account more than protecting the person he had been married to for over a decade. He cared more about the idea of losing money than he cared about the reality of breaking me. there's also something deeply insulting about the way he framed it. Stuck paying me for the rest of his life, as if I was some scam, as if I was trying to trap him, as if I was a burden he didn't choose, as if the marriage was something that happened to him, not something he entered willingly, as if commitment is only valid when it's convenient, and once it's not convenient, it becomes a sentence. It made me realize he didn't see marriage the way I did. I saw marriage as partnership. I saw it as building something together, sharing both the benefits and the hard parts. I saw it as loyalty. He saw it like a contract he wanted to break without penalty. He saw it like a business deal, and the moment he wanted out, he was irritated about the cost of exit. The more I reflect on it, the clearer it becomes that he had already emotionally removed himself before he ever said the words out loud. Because when someone is truly in pain about falling out of love, there is still compassion, there is still softness, there is still respect. Even if the relationship ends, there is usually some form of human care left behind. But his response was transactional, cold, self-centered. It was as if he was talking about a used car, not a marriage. As if I was an expense line, not a person. And that's why it felt like I was one giant financial burden to him. Because that's how he treated me in that moment. Like I was weight he didn't want to carry anymore. Like my value was tied to what I earned. Like my worth could be measured by what I contributed financially. And because my paycheck was smaller than his, he decided I was less. It's hard to explain how humiliating that is after 12 years. You start thinking about everything you did, the emotional labor, the patience, the effort, the compromises, the things you carried silently, the ways you showed up even when you were tired, the ways you supported him in big and small ways, in a million little moments that don't show up on a spreadsheet. And then you realize he wasn't counting any of that. He was counting dollars. He was counting status. He was counting what made him feel superior. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. His fear wasn't losing you. His fear was losing money. His grief wasn't the marriage ending. His grief was the idea of paying you. His concern wasn't how you'd survive emotionally. His concern was whether he'd be stuck financially. It wasn't just that he cheated. It was that he treated the fallout like an annoying fee and treated you like the fee. The fact that he was sleeping with someone 14 years younger adds another layer too. Because it shows how he was chasing something shallow while believing he was above consequences. It shows how he wanted the thrill of a new person without the responsibility of the life he already built. It shows how selfish the whole thing was. And it also shows how he needed to frame the breakup as, I'm not in love, instead of what it really was, which was, I'm choosing myself, and I don't want to deal with accountability. That kind of betrayal leaves a mark because it's not only emotional, it's existential. It makes you question what was real. It makes you question how long he saw you that way. It makes you question how long he had been mentally measuring you like you were a burden, not a partner. It makes you question whether he ever truly understood love, or whether he only understood ownership. But I think the clearest truth is the one you already said. All he cared about was being rich. And when wealth becomes someone's main goal, people stop being people to them. They become assets or liabilities. They become costs or benefits. They become something to keep if it boosts the image, and something to discard if it threatens the comfort. That's what he did to you. He discarded you like a cost he didn't want. And you didn't deserve that. You deserved a partner who would have been devastated to hurt you. You deserved someone who faced problems with you instead of running to someone younger and pretending it was love. You deserved someone who who would have seen your full-time work, your effort, your contribution, and understood that worth isn't measured by who makes the most money. You deserved someone who would have valued you as a person, not evaluated you like an expense. The hardest part about being blindsided like that is how quickly you can start bargaining, how quickly you start asking what you can do to fix it, because you're trying to save the life you built. But the truth is, you can't fix a marriage with someone who is already treating you like a burden. You can't repair something with someone who is more afraid of financial obligation than they are of hurting you. You can't compete with a man's obsession with money and ego when that's what he truly worships. He revealed himself in that moment, even if it took time to fully accept it. And painful as it is, that clarity becomes the beginning of freedom, because it means you stop trying to earn love from someone who is never going to love you in a healthy way. 12 years was real. Your devotion was real. Your devastation was real. His coldness was also real. And it tells you everything you need to know about who he was in the end. We were in marriage counseling with a chaplain, and I remember walking into that process with a kind of careful hope that I didn't even realize I was carrying. Not the bright, naive kind of hope that everything would magically be fixed. More like the tired, stubborn hope you get when you've been holding something together for too long and you're desperate for any sign that it can be repaired. I didn't go into it thinking the chaplain was going to wave a wand and turn my husband into a different person. I went into it thinking that if we had a neutral person in the room, someone he respected, someone he couldn't talk over as easily, then maybe we could finally communicate like adults. Maybe he would listen. Maybe he would stop twisting everything. Maybe he would admit his part. Maybe he would care enough to try. I wasn't asking for perfection. I wasn't asking for romance or grand gestures. I was asking for basic partnership. I was asking for the kind of effort that says, you matter to me, this marriage matters to me, I'm willing to do the work. I told myself that people can change if they want to, and counseling was supposed to be the place where we could lay things out honestly and build something better. It's almost embarrassing to say now how much I wanted that, but I did. I wanted to believe my marriage was salvageable. I wanted to believe that the man I married had a real heart under all the defensiveness, the coldness, the stubbornness. I wanted to believe that if he could just see what he was doing, he would choose to do better. The chaplain was calm and measured, the kind of person who made it easier to speak without the conversation immediately turning into a fight. In one session, he assigned us a book to read on communication. He said we could read it separately, but ideally together. That part felt important to me. Ideally together wasn't just a suggestion about reading habits. It was a statement about teamwork. It was the chaplain saying, if you want to change your relationship, you have to participate together. You have to build something together. You have to be willing to sit side by side, absorb the same information, and then talk about it. You have to treat it like a shared project. I took it seriously. I did what I always did in that marriage when someone asked for effort. I showed up. I read the book. I didn't skim it. I didn't treat it like a box to check. I actually read it. I tried to understand the points. I underlined things in my mind that felt relevant. I reflected on what I could do better, because I wasn't walking around believing I was perfect. I was willing to improve. I was willing to own my mistakes. I was willing to make changes, because that's what you do when you care about something. You work on it. There's a certain kind of vulnerability in reading a book like that when your relationship is already hurting. Every chapter feels like a mirror. Every suggestion feels like a test. You start noticing what's missing. You start noticing what hurts. You start noticing patterns you've been living inside for so long that you stopped recognizing them. You start thinking, maybe if I do this differently, it will change how we talk. Maybe if I say it this way, he won't get defensive. Maybe if I pause longer, he'll hear me. Maybe if I use these tools, we'll finally stop hurting each other. And even though the book was about communication, what I was really doing was reaching for a life where I wasn't constantly misunderstood, reaching for a marriage where problems didn't turn into blame, reaching for a relationship where I could be a human being and not get punished for it. I finished the book with this mixture of exhaustion and hope, because it's tiring to put effort into a broken dynamic, but it also felt like at least I was doing something. At least I was trying to move forward. Then the day came when it was time for us to meet with the chaplain again. I assumed we would both go. That's what counseling is. You go together. Even if you're annoyed, even if you're uncomfortable, you show up. You go because you said you would. You go because the marriage is bigger than your mood. You go because leaving your spouse to sit alone in front of the chaplain sends a message, and it's not a good one. But he said I could go, and he wasn't coming, just like that. No serious conversation, no apology, no explanation that sounded like he cared. He just opted out as if it didn't matter. As if the counseling was a silly errand I could handle alone. As if we weren't there because the marriage was in trouble. As if it wasn't his marriage, too. And then he said something that made the whole situation snap into focus in the most humiliating, infuriating way. He said that book was for me to read because I was the one with the problem. I remember feeling my face go hot when he said it, not because I felt guilty, but because I felt that familiar, sick mixture of disbelief and anger. Disbelief that someone could drag us into counseling, sit there in sessions, listen to a chaplain, assign work for both of us, then turn around and decide it was all about me being broken. Anger that he could do it so calmly, like it was obvious, like he was the reasonable one, like I should accept that framing. Because what he was really saying was, I'm not going to do any work. I'm not going to look at myself. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to participate. I'm going to declare you the problem and then refuse to show up so I can avoid accountability. It hit me that he hadn't entered counseling with the goal of repairing anything. He entered counseling the way some people enter any situation where they might be challenged. They enter to control the narrative. They enter to look good. They enter to get a third party to agree with them. They enter to gather more ammunition. They enter to prove they're right and you're wrong. And if the process doesn't immediately confirm their story, they quit because the point was never healing. The point was winning. That's why I had that thought you expressed so perfectly, even if you said it with an eye roll. He could have just said that instead of dragging me there in the first place. He could have said, I'm not interested in counseling. I'm not interested in changing. I think you're the problem. It would have been cruel, but it would have been honest. Instead, he participated just enough to pull you into the process, just enough to make you invest effort, just enough to make you hope. And then he used your effort against you by reframing it as proof that you're the one who needs fixing. That's what made it feel so disrespectful. It wasn't only that he refused to go back. It was the bait and switch. It was the fact that he let a chaplain set a plan. And then he decided the plan didn't apply to him. It was the way he acted like the marriage problem lived inside you, not between you. It was the way he treated the whole counseling process like it was a service you were supposed to use to become more convenient for him. I can't describe the loneliness of that moment, without thinking about all the other moments that probably led up to it. The times you tried to communicate and he dismissed you. The times you tried to bring up an issue and he flipped it back on you. The times you tried to ask for basic emotional presence and he acted like you were asking too much. The way you slowly learned to approach him carefully, to choose your words like you were walking through a field of hidden traps because you knew the wrong phrasing could turn into a fight. The way you tried to carry the emotional weight for both of you because he refused to carry any. That's what makes a statement like, "You're the one with the problem," so damaging. Because it doesn't just hurt in the moment. It erases everything you've been doing. It erases the effort you've been making. It erases the reality that a relationship takes two people. It turns a partnership into a hierarchy where one person is the judge and the other person is the one constantly being evaluated. It also makes you question yourself, even when you know it's unfair. That's the maddening part. A sane part of your brain says, "This is ridiculous," but another part of your brain says, "Am I really the problem? Did I do something wrong by wanting to communicate? Did I do something wrong by asking for counseling? Did I do something wrong by trying to fix it?" That's how manipulation works. It doesn't have to make logical sense to leave a mark. It just has to hit you in the place where you care. I also imagine what it must have felt like to realize you were going to have to walk into that session alone. Sitting in front of a chaplain by yourself, knowing it was meant to be both of you, knowing you were the one who read the book, knowing you were the one who did the work, and knowing your husband had decided not only to skip it, but to blame you. That's such a humiliating position to be put in, and it's also infuriating because it's so unnecessary. It's a choice. He chose to leave you to face it alone. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he told you right after that, "I never loved you." That sentence is the kind of sentence that changes the air in your body. It doesn't just hurt your feelings. It shakes your history. It tries to rewrite your past. It makes you look back at every moment and question what was real. It makes you question whether you imagined the good times, whether you misread him, whether you were ever safe, whether the love you thought you shared was something you made up on your own. And that's what makes it so cruel, because even if a relationship is ending, even if someone is unhappy, even if someone feels distant, saying, "I never loved you," is not a productive truth. It's a weapon. It's designed to wound. It's designed to destroy your footing. It's designed to make you feel like you wasted your life, like you were foolish, like you were unlovable, like you were tricked. It's not a sentence meant for closure. It's a sentence meant for impact. I remember thinking, people can fall out of love, yes. People can change, yes. But "I never loved you" is different. It's a statement that turns your entire relationship into a lie. And when someone says that at the exact moment you're trying to do the work of saving the relationship, it feels like being pushed off a cliff. Because you're still holding the rope and they're telling you the rope was never real. It also makes you wonder if he said it because it was true or because he wanted to control the ending. Some people can't handle being seen as the bad guy. They can't handle being accountable for leaving. They can't handle admitting they were wrong. So they choose a statement that makes it sound like the relationship was never valid. Because if it was never valid, then your pain becomes less important. If he never loved you, then he doesn't have to honor the life you built. He doesn't have to respect your grief. He doesn't have to acknowledge the damage he caused. He can shrug it off and act like you were just mistaken. But the truth is, even if he didn't love you in a healthy way, even if his love was shallow or conditional or selfish, you still lived a real life. You still invested real effort. You still gave real care. And that matters. His statement doesn't erase your reality. It doesn't erase the time you gave. It doesn't erase the work you did. It doesn't erase the fact that you showed up to counseling because you cared. What "I never loved you" really reveals, more than anything, is his willingness to be cruel to avoid vulnerability. Because a person who can sit with the truth, even a painful truth, might say, "I don't think I can do this anymore," or "I don't feel what I used to feel," or "I'm not able to be the partner you need." Those statements are still painful, but they're human. They acknowledge the other person's humanity. They don't try to destroy you on the way out. "I never loved you" is a scorched earth sentence. It's the sentence you use when you want to leave someone in rubble. And paired with "the book is for you because you are the one with the problem," it paints a very clear picture of someone who never intended to meet you in the middle. Someone who was comfortable taking your effort while refusing to offer his own. Someone who wanted the relationship to exist on his terms only, and when it didn't, he punished you for trying. I think what makes it even harder is the way that moment likely forced you to hold two truths at once. One truth was your own effort, your own sincerity, your own willingness to try. The other truth was his coldness, his refusal, his cruelty. Holding those two truths at the same time is exhausting because your brain wants to resolve it. Your brain wants a neat explanation. Your brain wants to say, either he loved me or he didn't. Either I mattered or I didn't. But life is messy. And people like this make it messier on purpose because confusion keeps you stuck longer. That's why moments like this often become turning points. Not because they're the first time he hurt you, but because they're the moment the mask slips far enough that you can't pretend anymore. If he's willing to skip the counseling session, blame you for the entire marriage problem, and then tell you he never loved you, what is left to save? What is left to work on? How do you repair something with someone who refuses responsibility and uses cruelty as an exit strategy? You can't. And the saddest part is, it's not because you didn't try hard enough. You did try. You read the book. You showed up. You were willing. The marriage didn't fail because you didn't care. It failed because you were carrying it alone. That's what that whole sequence revealed. The chaplain offered a tool. You picked it up. He dropped it and then pointed at you like you were holding the tool because you were broken. That is such a clear metaphor for the whole relationship. You doing the work, him refusing, then him blaming you for the fact that the work exists at all. Even now, I can feel the eye roll in your story because it's the only sane response to something so ridiculous. It's the emotional version of saying, of course he did that. Of course he made it my problem. Of course he turned counseling into another way to invalidate me. Eye rolls sometimes are just your mind protecting you from the full weight of how disrespectful it was. But behind that eye roll is grief. Grief for what you hoped for. Grief for what you deserved. Grief for the time you gave. Grief for the version of your marriage you thought could exist if both of you tried. It's hard to admit that you were willing to do the work with someone who never wanted to do it with you. And if that sentence, "I never loved you," ever echoes in your head, if it ever tries to attach itself to your self-worth, I want the truth to be louder than his cruelty. A person who says something like that, in that context, is not offering an objective fact about your worth. He is revealing his character. He is revealing his inability to be accountable. He is revealing his willingness to harm to avoid responsibility. He is revealing that he would rather cut you down than sit with discomfort. You can be loved. You deserved love. You deserved a partner who would have read the book with you, laughed with you, tried with you, and shown up to that session even if it was hard. You deserved a partner who would have said, "I'm sorry, I'm struggling, but I want to do better," instead of a partner who made everything your fault. Because the truth is, communication books don't exist because one person is the problem. They exist because relationships are systems. They exist because even two good people can struggle to communicate. They exist because communication is a skill. If your husband refused to participate, he wasn't refusing a book. He was refusing partnership. And that's the clearest, most painful point of all. You didn't lose him because you weren't enough. You lost him because he didn't want to be the kind of husband who shows up. He didn't want to do the work. He wanted you to do the work while he stayed comfortable and superior. And when you finally got close to a process that might reveal that, he quit and threw a cruel sentence at you to end it on his terms. It's awful. It's unfair. It's humiliating. And it also gives you something. Eventually, when the shock wears off, it gives you clarity. Because once someone shows you that they are not willing to try, that they will blame you for the existence of problems, and that they will use cruelty to avoid accountability, you can stop exhausting yourself trying to earn a love that isn't being offered. You can stop reading books alone for a marriage that takes two. You can stop hoping for effort from someone who sees effort as something only you should provide. You deserved an equal partner. You deserved someone who would sit next to you on the couch with that book and say, "Okay, let's learn this together." You deserved someone who would go to that next meeting, even if it made him uncomfortable, because marriage is bigger than comfort. You deserved someone who, even if he was struggling, would still speak to you with basic human care. What you got was a man who dragged you into counseling, let you hope, then blamed you, bailed, tried to erase your entire history with one cruel sentence. That says everything about him. It says nothing about whether you are lovable.
If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open, and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.